All right, let's dive into one of the most amazing and fast-paced times in a kid's life, the preschool years. We're going to break down everything that's happening in their little minds and bodies from ages 3 to 6 and what it all means for how we care for them.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll get a handle on how their minds and bodies are growing. Then, we'll look at all the cool new skills that pop up because of that growth. After that, we'll talk about keeping them safe and healthy, what a doctor's checkup looks like, and finally, how to provide the best care when they're not feeling well.
Okay, first up, let's lay down the basics. To really get preschoolers, you gotta understand the blueprint, what's going on inside their heads and with their bodies that are growing like weeds.
So, who is the preschooler? We're talking about that magical window between 3 and 6 years old, and trust me, it's so much more than just getting bigger. This is when you see these huge, dramatic leaps in how they think, how they feel, and how they start to find their own little place in the world.
You know, the famous theorist Jean Piaget called this the pre-operational phase. What that really means is their thinking is super imaginative, but it's not based on logic just yet. It's all intuition. They see everything from their own point of view. It's why a preschooler might genuinely believe the moon is following their car, because from where they're sitting, it absolutely is.
And then there's Erik Erikson, who saw this whole stage as a kind of psychological tug of war, initiative versus guilt. This is that moment when kids want to do stuff, you know? They want to invent a game, make the rules, lead the charge. If you encourage that, they get this awesome sense of purpose. But if they're constantly told no or criticized, that can lead to a real sense of guilt.
Now, while all this amazing stuff is happening in their heads, their bodies are keeping up. They're growing steady, putting on about 4.5 to 6.5 pounds every single year. That's like adding a small bag of flour in weight year after year.
And they're shooting up, too. They get taller by about 2.5 to 3.5 inches each year. You start to see that classic round toddler look fade away as their arms and legs get longer. And they just look more, well, like a little kid.
This chart really paints the picture, doesn't it? You can see it right here. A typical 3-year-old is around 32 pounds. And by the time they hit 5, they've packed on almost 10 more pounds. It's just this nice, steady, predictable climb.
Okay, so let's see what all this growth actually looks like in action. This development unlocks a whole spectacular world of new skills. This is really when you see their personalities and their independence just start to explode.
I love this slide because it shows you how much can change in just 1 year. It's wild. On the left, you've got your typical 3-year-old, and on the right, a 4-year-old. The jump in what they can do physically, mentally, and socially is it's huge. Let me break it down. At 3, they're mastering big things like riding a trike and stringing a few words together. But fast forward to 4, now we're talking way more coordination, like catching a ball, and these massive cognitive leaps, like telling a whole story, or even showing empathy and comforting a friend who's upset.
You can see this social boom in how they play. Toddlers do what's called parallel play. They're in the same sandbox, but they're each doing their own thing. Preschoolers, they move into associative play. They're actually interacting, sharing toys, and playing together even if there aren't any set rules. It's basically the beginning of teamwork.
So, with all this development happening at lightning speed, mentally, physically, socially, the million-dollar question is, how do we best support them and keep them safe on this crazy ride?
The day-to-day essentials really boil down to 3 main things. 1, great nutrition to fuel all that growth. 2, getting those good toothbrushing habits started. And 3, and this one is huge, injury prevention. Their curiosity is growing way faster than their sense of danger.
Yeah, because they can suddenly climb and run and open things, we have to be on high alert. The biggest risks are things you'd expect. Falls, getting burned on a hot stove, and of course, the serious dangers around water and cars.
All right, let's switch gears and put on our clinical hats for a second. If you were a doctor or a nurse, what would a healthy preschooler look like on paper? What's that medical snapshot?
So when a nurse takes their vitals, they're looking for a couple of key numbers. A healthy heart rate, when they're resting, should be somewhere between 70 and 120 beats a minute. And their breathing should be nice and steady, about 20 to 25 breaths per minute. It's a really quick, easy way to check their overall health.
Blood pressure is another important piece of the puzzle, and there's a pretty specific healthy range for this age. For example, the top number for a boy might be in the low to mid-90s. Checking this is just a routine part of making sure everything is working as it should.
But it's not just about the numbers. The way the exam is done is just as critical. A great nurse knows that it's all about building trust. That means getting the family involved, telling the kid they're doing a great job, and really paying attention to their cues to see if they're comfortable.
And finally, let's talk about how to use all this knowledge in the real world, especially when a preschooler gets sick or has to go to the hospital. I mean, that can be so scary for them and for their parents.
We really have to try and see the world through their eyes. This quote just nails it. They have this very simple, almost magical idea of how their bodies work. So something routine to us, like getting a shot, can feel incredibly scary and personal to them.
So how do we help them tell us when they're in pain? This is where a tool like the FACES scale is an absolute game changer. It lets a child just point to the face that shows how they feel. It basically translates this big, confusing feeling into something a doctor or nurse can actually understand and help with. And when it comes to giving medicine, the approach is everything. The first choice is always by mouth, liquids, chewables. But if a shot is the only way, using the right spot is crucial to make it less traumatic. For preschoolers, that's usually the big muscle on the side of the thigh. So it all comes back to this one big question. Once you understand their unique developmental blueprint, from their imaginative minds to their growing bodies to the clinical needs, you're just in a much better position to help. It doesn't matter if you're a parent, a teacher, or a nurse. This knowledge gives all of us the power to better support every single preschooler on their amazing journey.